I like this slide. It's something that somebody else made. It's not my images. It was given to me. The top two images, I don't know. I think if I had to hang one of these in my house, it would be the one on the right, not the left. Maybe it's because the background's prettier. I don't know, but it's pleasing with that S curve. It's a pleasing line, better than that vertical line. And then below it, I think is even more instructive, right? So the ski lift, the image on the left, right, is just straight up, and then the image on the right, the photographer just took 3 steps to his left and shot the photograph. Now get this, right? You're getting paid a bunch of money from Squaw Valley or Heavenly Valley to go up there and take some pictures on a sunny day of people using the ski lift. And the photographer who hasn't taken my class brings back the one on the left. You all bring back the one on the right. Which one does the client like better? The one on the right. If you want to argue with me and say the one on the left's better, fine, but you're wrong. Sorry. The one on the right's better. The difference is 2 steps. It's not a really cool camera. It's not a really cool lens. It's not a really cool tripod. It's none of that. You could have shot these with your phone. And you could shoot either image. What makes these different is how you see, how you think, how you react to the lines in the photograph. And trust me, if you can walk up to a scene and look at what's on the left, think about it, take 2 steps to the left and shoot the image on the right with a diagonal, you've gotten an A in this class. You're done. You got everything you need to know from this class, you got. So if you've done that, then you're off and running. You got it all. I don't care what your final grade is, you get it. Right? So that's the important part of this image. There's not a lot of difference. It's just how you see. S curves. Here's that friend of ours, the seal, playing with that S curve. The other way you can sort of emphasize different emotional qualities in a photograph is by the tone or the key. High key or low key. Low key, very dark, lots of blacks, not a lot of lights. High key, very white, bright, not a lot or any black at all. As you can imagine, the darker images are a little bit more scary, more mysterious. Yeah, then more masculine, probably not. Lighter values are a little bit more fun, a little bit more playful, right? Probably not feminine. I don't know that we should put gender in these two. Probably doesn't quite work. But think about the tone and how people would react to the tone of an image. So there's a high key image, bird butts, right? Bunch of butts. No blacks, everything's kind of bright, right, in the image. I did these on purpose in Death Valley, some high key, right, images where I just really opened up the exposure while I shot it, and then I did some more post-processing to make that image be very bright, very washed out, a little different take on Death Valley than I usually shoot. Maybe a little bit more realistic, because it is stark and it is bright. There's not a lot of contrast, except at sunrise and sunset. But high key, very bright. Taking the sun in the frame and just letting it just flare out. Yeah, this may not be high key, but it's predominantly white. Another high key image. These are actually white windmills, and it's very foggy and raining out, so the sky is all white from the fog and everything. So that was a nice little nature giving us a high key. Low key, a little darker, a little bit more mysterious. Not a lot of whites, but mostly darks in the image. I was going through a tough time a few years ago, and I decided to do some self-portraits to kind of see if I could get a handle on what I was feeling emotionally and see if I can somehow get it out in a photograph. So these turned out to be very low-key images, one light, letting the rest of everything else go black, and having it be a little bit more mournful or mysterious or a little bit more dark, over with my thoughts. Here's an exercise I did on the 7 deadly sins. You can guess which one's which, but predominantly black background, mostly dark, not very bright. We talked about visual rhythm in the beginning of the class. That was one of our compositional exercises. Repeating patterns, things that repeat over and over again. And, how do we use them? How do we not use them? How do we create rhythm, which translates into maybe a good composition? And then how can it get a little monotonous or maybe even mechanical as a word for these repeating pattern dynamics? Saw this image before, the birds, repeating patterns. My ode to Hitchcock. So repeating patterns of all the birds. This is at San Jose International, the new terminal. Those repeating patterns of those glass plates in the ceiling. And clearly the patterns of the picket fence. And the chain. This is over at Treasure Island. If you have never been there, you're in the city someday and there's not much going on, you're bored, jump across the bridge and go over to Treasure Island and drive around. There's some neat stuff. This is an abandoned pool where they put a bunch of graffiti. It's pretty gross down inside there. The water's been there for 100 years. But you can take some pretty interesting pictures of all the graffiti and stuff like that. Repeating pattern, either the faces of the cows or the color of the cows. Right? You can kind of loosen up the definition a little bit if you want. Nature gives us a lot of repeating patterns, right, with bushes and things like that. One of the things that I think about a lot is, what do I choose to include and what do I choose to exclude? And in doing that, I tend to simplify my compositions if I can. Put in enough to tell me where I am, what I am, time, what's going on, but not just everything in the picture. So maybe edit a little bit before you shoot. We're in a time right now with our cameras that we can crop and change and delete, insert, and do all kinds of things after the fact. But to me, the biggest challenge in photography and the biggest reward in photography for me is shooting. And when I go out shooting, I want to get the image. I'm really happy when I come home, I put an image on the screen, and I don't do anything. I don't crop it. I may change the contrast. I may make it a little brighter. But I don't do anything. I don't remove anything. I don't add anything. I don't try to cover up anything. I don't crop anything. When I can get all that right, I feel good. I feel like I made a really good photograph. And trust me, it would be the same if I did it post-production and made a good photograph. They'd both be good photographs. But I get more satisfaction out of making the photograph in the field. Now, some people get more satisfaction of making a bunch of images in the field and coming home and then going through the creative process. I go through the creative process in the field. Other people do it post-visualization. I do pre-visualization. So it just depends on what you want to do. So here's a thought. Edit before you shoot. Change your camera position, change your focal length. Use the frame, depth of field, right? Look at the lines, right? Is it a static or is it a dynamic composition? How are those lines moving through the photograph? How's the photograph being filled? What's the little aha in there? Kind of frame within a frame. A little bit trite, a little bit overdone. This is a nice one. My predecessor made this image. Frame within a frame. Again, simplify the composition. Think about it with a minimalist point of view. Think about those extraneous things that we don't need. Do you need them in the image or not? And if you do, why? Most people err on the side of including too much than too little, especially when they're beginning photographers. So consider that when you're shooting. Getting up close, filling the frame, right? Shallow depth of field, really focusing on just one thing in the photograph. Again, bold, simple kind of images. You may want to think about a single dominant center of interest. Maybe obviously who you're photographing. What is it? What are you taking a picture of? Let there be no confusion. Maybe that's how you want to compose your images. There's no question about this image. There's no question about what I'm shooting. Right? It's bold. It's in your face. Right? It's the center of interest. We know what it is. We recognize it instantly. Either we like it or we don't, because maybe we like cats, maybe we don't. Dominant center of interest, right? Filling the frame. This wasn't really the moment shot. She was laying there for hours, and there was a bunch more, but it was just too good to pass up. Simplifying the composition, right? Getting only what you need in the image. So most of these images where I'm really isolating the subject, I'm also using a fairly telephoto lens. I couldn't get this close, or I couldn't get close to any of those animals with a normal lens or a 50 or a wide angle lens. Too wide of an angle of view. All these were shot with a 200 millimeter lens, probably, maybe even more. So I could really, really isolate the subject. So sometimes the lens demands, or the simplification of the image demands different equipment. And that may be a roadblock for some of you. But it may also, if you come up against it often enough, you decide to be a wildlife photographer, you probably should invest in some long glass, right? If you're going to be a wildlife photographer. If you're going to be a landscape photographer, you probably don't need a 600. Probably not. If you're going to be a street photographer, you don't need a 600 millimeter lens. Then you're a sniper on a rooftop taking pictures. Right? So what you like and what you photograph really, really will help determine what direction you go in terms of camera, in terms of lens, to make the best use of the money we have to invest in this crazy avocation or occupation that can eat up every single penny that you have. I said get close, fill the frame with or your format. Use it wisely. It says darkroom in here, but you can say digital darkroom. Don't rely on cropping all the time. You can do it, and it's fine. But try to get everything right on the front end. Now that being said, I will often take a photograph exactly the way I think it should be, and then just for safety, I'll take 2 steps back and shoot one more. That gives me a little bit more fudge factor around the edge, just in case. If I'm shooting images where I only get one shot at it, I may blow this off, and I may shoot a little bit wider, because I know I can always come in 10-20% all the way around, or on one, 2, 3, or 4 sides. Right? But I can't manufacture data past the edge of that frame. So consider that. How close is too close? I don't know. Pretty intimate with those eyes, right? Single, dominant, center of interest. These guys were taking off and landing every 2 seconds. But they were all taking off and showing me their butts. And when they were landing, they were showing me their butts. And so I sat and waited and waited and waited and waited. Finally, one of the pelicans decided to spin around and land into the wind and give me that front shot. And then, bam, I got it. This is with a 600. They're pretty far away. I don't think I can get this shot with a 50. It'd be so close I'd scare them all away. Besides, it's an island that I'd have to swim to. So, again, sometimes equipment can afford you some of these images that you may not be able to get with, a normal lens or a kit lens or something like that. Close, you can tell stories. You don't have to include everything. You can get the message across. Use everything. Use the aperture, right? We know it controls depth of field. We know we can get rid of backgrounds or we can emphasize the background. Use shutter speed. We know we can see motion. We can create action. We can have things that are blurry or things that are frozen in the image by the correct use of the shutter speed. Shallow depth of field. Everything behind the leaf is out of focus. Again, we saw this the very first day. Shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field. Stop action. Now, I saw this wave break every so often, and it looked huge. It wasn't really bigger than that house. It's just closer. But you can't really study it when it's breaking because it's always moving. Right? So to get a shot where it's frozen, you then can really study. You really can sense the power and how that water is being thrown, right? Being thrusted, right, over those rocks and into the air. Stop motion. You see this happening, but you don't see that image. You see something like it for a millisecond. It's hard to see this happening, but when you do, when you stop it in mid splash, you can really begin to see the geometry, right, and how the splash makes that little crown each time it hits the top of the Corona bottle. The in-between shutter speeds, those shutter speeds where most of the image is in focus, but those things moving quicker have a little bit of blur to them. A little bit of panning there. We saw this earlier. What do you want water to look like? This is another shutter speed choice. Do you want it to look like the left or the right or something in between? What's the best way to photograph these rocks in this water? What's going to get the message across the most? Same lens, same on a tripod, same camera to subject distance, same everything, just different exposure. That's all. Little waterfalls over on the backside of Mount Hamilton. There's all kinds of little. When it rains, there's beautiful little waterfalls back there. So the other thing we can control is focal length, right? Long lens tends to compress things. Shorter lens tends to sort of spread things out or exaggerate the depth in the frame. We can use a longer focal length to narrow the angle of view, to minimize, to simplify it, as I was talking about with the wildlife, or a wide angle lens to give you everything in the frame, give you more information. Taking a photograph of taking a street photograph and using a telephoto lens and just getting somebody's face is fine, but when was it taken? Where was it taken? Was it 100 years ago? Was it yesterday? Maybe you want to include something that marks time, that marks the city you're in, not just the face. Then it's a portrait, right? And it's different. Here's some dunes shot with a long lens, so they're compressed. The dune furthest away is probably a couple miles, but it's compressed together with a long lens. These birds are, pretty far away from those pilings, but they're compressed together with the long lens. Here's a wide-angle lens, probably 2 feet from that initial crack to the little top of the frame. Because it was a wide-angle lens, it really accentuates that distance. So think about all these things that we've talked about. Some are contradictory. Fill the frame. Touch the edge. Don't touch the edge. Fill the frame. Don't fill the frame. Give me some room around it. Right? Avoid distracting shapes and edges in the photograph, but I want it to be dynamic. I want it to be edgy. Right? Choose what to include and what to exclude. So there's a bit of a contradiction here. Each photograph requires maybe a different set of parameters. This list can go on and on and on and on. When you are thinking about ingredients of a good composition, some questions you can ask yourself, what is the simplicity of the composition? What are the lines, shape, texture, tone? The balance, is it symmetrical or is it asymmetrical? Is the lighting dramatic or is it maybe overcast and flat? Do we have a full tonal range? Whites and blacks and everything in between. Right? Is there patterns, texture? What's the color? Is it in the moment? Timing. Sometimes a photograph is all about timing. We'll see some in the history section where the composition is bad, the lighting is bad, the frame choice is bad. What's happening in the middle of the photograph is absolutely an amazing moment. And that trumps everything. So you can throw all the composition stuff away if you get the moment. Okay? Rhythm, depth, mood, that sort of thing. Okay, so that concludes the composition section and the lecture for this module. Have a great week, and I will be talking to you one more time with a short, brief overview of the history of photography the next module.